So what we're going to do is we're going to start by finding the zeros. Now if you recall, we would just change the sign or set x plus 1 equal to 0, and we will get x equals negative 1. The other 0 here will be x equals 3. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our graph, and we're going to find x equals negative 1, and we're going to put a dot there. Okay, and we're going to find x equals 3, and we're going to put a dot there. So those are the zeros of our function, where our function hits the x-axis. Now what we're trying to do at this point is see what the function is doing between those two zeros. So is the function going up between those two zeros, in other words above the x-axis, or is it going below the x-axis? So remember, the way that we do that is we do a sign chart. So we're going to do a sign chart for the function, and we're going to do it at between negative 1 and 3, right? Those are our two zeros. So we're going to just pick any point. Let's say 0, because that's the easiest thing. And we're going to plug that into our original function. So we're going to do 0 plus 1 times 0 minus 3. And we can figure out the number. It's fine. But really all we're looking for is whether it's positive or negative. So 0 plus 1 is obviously a positive number. And 0 minus 3 is a negative number. Oops, it's negative 3, but we could just say it's a negative number. So a positive times a negative equals some negative number. Okay? So that's telling us that the function is negative, let's go over to my sign chart there, between negative 1 and 3, which means then the function will look like this between the two zeros. And that's what f of x will look like. Okay? Now, when we look at number 2, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to find our zeros first. So, oh, that's a little big. Let's go a little bit smaller. There we go. All right, so we're going to have x equals negative 3. We're going to have x equals 1, and we're going to have x equals 4. Those are going to be our zeros. So we're going to do a sign chart. Negative 3 will be our furthest 0 to the left because it's the smallest. 4 will be our largest, and 1's going to be somewhere there. All right, so what we're going to do is the same thing again. We're going to pick a number, in this case between negative 3 and 1. I always like 0. I just think it's easier. So we're going to find f of 0. So we're going to plug it back into that original equation. And when we do that, we do 0 plus 3, which is 3. And then I do 0 minus 1, which is negative 1. And then I do 0 minus 4, which is negative 4. Now, we can look at that, and we can see we have a positive number times a negative number times another negative number, which means that's going to be positive. Okay? All right. Now let's try something between 1 and 4. So let's just say like 2. Let's keep it easy. So if we plug in 2 into the original, we get 5. We plug 2 into 2 minus 1, and we get 1. And if we plug 2 into 2 minus 4, we get negative 4. So here we can see that a positive times a negative is a negative. So we would have a negative on our sign chart. So if we go over to our graph, and I guess I should have done this first, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to put a dot at negative 3. That's one of our zeros. I'm going to put a dot at 1. That's another 0. And the last 0 is at 4. Okay, so if we look at our sign chart, what's happening here is between negative 3 and 1, the function is positive. So the function will go above the x-axis like that. Now if we look between 1 and 4, the function is negative, which means the function will go down. So the function will look something like that. Number 3, we're going to look at the zeros first. So we have a 0 at x equals 0. We have a 0 at x equals negative 4. We have a 0 at x equals 2. And we have a 0 at x equals 5. So let's put the dots on the graph. So we have 0 -4, 2, and 5. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start by trying to find our sign chart for the function. Okay, so -4 is going to go furthest to the left. Oops, my goodness, my pen does not want to work. 5 is going to go furthest to the right, and then we will put 0, and we will put 2 somewhere here. All right, so let's start by finding, let's say, f of -1. So when I plugged f of -1 into the original, I get -1 times 3 times -3 times -6. And when we multiply all that out, that ends up being a negative number. So f of -1 is a negative number. All right, so then let's do, how about f of +1? So if I put in +1, I get 1 times 5 times -1 times -6, right? Oops, actually that's -4. Sorry about that, that's -4. But doesn't really matter because we've got 2 positives times 2 negatives, which would be a positive number. All right, last one, let's pick 3. So if we put in 3, we'll get 3 times 7 times, what do we got there, 5. No, what am I doing? 3 minus 2 is 1, silly. Okay, sorry about that. And then 3 minus 5, we've got a -2 here. Okay, and when we look at all of that, that ends up being a negative number. So what's going to happen here in our function is our function's going to start by going below the x-axis, then it's going to go above the x-axis, and then it's going to go below again. So we're going to start by going below, above, below. And that's roughly what our function is going to look like. Okay? All right, number 4. So we are going to find the zeros. So we have x equals 0. We have x equals -1. And we have x equals +1. So let's set up our little sign chart here. Okay, this one's a bit more of a pain in the neck. So let me just put my zeros on my axes here. Okay, they're all really close together, and we're going to have to do fractions, unfortunately. We don't really have a choice, but we also do have a calculator, so not a big deal. So we're going to try -1/2. All right, so that gives me -1/2 times, now -1/2 plus 1 is a +1/2. And 1/2, when you square it, is 1/4. Now, don't be so concerned about the 1/4. I mean, it is important, but we're really just looking for whether it's positive or negative here. Okay, now I'm going to put in -1/2 minus 1. Well, -1/2 minus 1 is -1/2. And just FYI, -1/2, if you change that in your calculator, is -3/2. And when you square a -3/2, that will be a positive 9/4. Again, the number's not that important. You're looking for whether the sign's going to be positive or negative. So you can see here that a negative times a positive will give us something negative. And we really don't care what that negative is at this point. Okay? All right, let's try +1/2. So +1/2 would give me 1/2 times 1/2. You know what? I'm just going to leave it like that, 1/2. And when I square that, that's still going to be positive. And then 1/2 minus 1 will be a -1/2. But again, I'm going to square that. And when I square that, that's positive. So between 0 and 1, we're positive. So the function's going to start below. Ooh, that's a bad picture. And then go above. Okay? So there's what our picture looks like. All right, last two. Number 5. I factored by grouping. So what I did was I took out an x squared and I got x plus 3. I took out a -4 and I got x plus 3. And then I kept going and I got x squared minus 4. and I got x plus 3. Now remember, x squared minus 4 is the difference of two perfect squares. So that's x plus 2, x minus 2, and x plus 3. Okay, now your zeros are x equals negative 2, x equals positive 2, and x equals negative 3. So we plot negative 3. We plot, oops, that's really close, negative 2, I'll make it really tiny. And I'm going to plot positive 2. There we go. All right, so I'm going to do my sign chart now. So I'm going to do my sign chart for the function. And I've got negative 3, I've got negative 2, and I've got positive 3. Now, between negative 3 and negative 2, that's going to be sort of a pain in the neck. Again, I would just put the numbers honestly into your calculator. I think that would be the easiest way to do that. Now, what you can do, actually, is, you can, I would probably plug it into your calculator. If you remind me after you watch this video, say, Miss Carter, show me the shortcut to putting it into my calculator, I will show you how to do that. Okay, so when you put in, really the only thing you can put in is negative 2.5. When you do that into your calculator and work all of that out, or you can put it right here. Let me get my, there we go. Come on, there we go. If you put it right in there, what's going to end up happening is you will end up with a positive number. Okay? And then if I plug in, let's say, f of 0, that's nice and easy to do. Again, I would put it right here where that arrow is. And if you put in 0, you're going to get 2 times negative 2 times 3, and you can see that'll be a negative number. So we have negative here and positive here. So we're going above the x-axis, then below the x-axis. Alrighty, last one. Woohoo! Same thing again. You're going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to take out an x squared, and I get x plus 4. Then I'm going to take out a negative 9, and I get x plus 4. And this is just like number 5, where you're going to end up with the difference of two perfect squares. And you're going to have to take that a step further and keep factoring that to x plus 3, x minus 3, and then we've got the x plus 4 that we bring down. All right, so our zeros are going to be at negative 3, at positive 3, and at negative 4. So let's go over to the graph. Negative 4, negative 3, and positive 3. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to make a sign chart. Now, this is where we run up against that problem again. Again, when you're done with this video, say, Miss Carter, show me the shortcut to plugging this into the calculator, because it's so much easier. This is the thing that's a pain in the neck right there. So I'm going to just say, trust me right now, it's positive, and I promise you I'll show you the shortcut. All right, now to do this section right here, that's easy enough. Let's plug in 0. So we plug in 0. Again, I like to plug it right there to where the factored form is. It's just so much easier. And so if I plug in 0 there where I drew that arrow, I'm going to get 3 times negative 3 times, 4, right? And that's going to be a negative number. So my function is above the x-axis, then below the x-axis. And there we go. All done.